Seth Rollins is no stranger to knee injuries. The five-time world champion has fought through them before, but this time might be different. While he's awaiting further medical evaluation, Rollins has already admitted that he expects to take an extended break from in-ring competition. If that turns out to be true, the fallout could deeply affect his latest alliance. Since WrestleMania 41, Rollins has been the foundation of a rising faction featuring Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed. With their leader sidelined, the spotlight now shifts, and the pressure rises. According to Paul Heyman, this is a put-up-or-shut-up moment for the group. This allows even more spotlight to be put on Braun Breaker, who is going to main event multiple WrestleManias in the future, Heyman said. I was predicting that even before Braun Breaker was with me on television. In the next few minutes, you'll hear the whispers WWE never wanted the world to hear. Of surgeries postponed, WrestleMania plans shattered, and a faction leader whose silence says more than any promo ever could. But first, hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up, because the story behind Seth Rollins' injury is about to rewrite everything. It didn't start with a brutal chair shot. It didn't even happen inside the ring. What took Seth Rollins down was something far crueler. For months, Rollins had been limping between greatness and collapse, his body breaking down while his presence propped up one of WWE's most dominant new factions. Together with Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed, Rollins had formed an unlikely alliance after WrestleMania 41. One that fused raw violence with tactical brilliance. One that Paul Heyman once called the most dangerous brain trust since The Shield. But on Saturday night, everything fell apart. Rollins was scheduled for a backstage segment after his tag match ended, something simple. A stare down with Solo Sikoa. A few words. One smirk. But he never made it to the camera. Security footage reviewed later showed Rollins favoring his right leg as he walked through the curtain. Then, a stumble. A drop. A second knee buckling beneath him. And then, nothing, silence. Trainers rushed in. One witness said Rollins clutched his leg and said, "It's gone. It's gone again." The same knee he'd torn years ago in Dublin. The same one that nearly ended his career in 2015. And this time, the stakes were higher. Because this time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was anchoring the futures of two rising stars. And if the rumors were true, that his knee needed reconstruction, then everything they'd built was about to fall into chaos. Backstage, Paul Heyman didn't say a word when Braun Breaker demanded answers from medics. When Bronson Reed punched a wall and stormed off, Heyman simply sat. Not with grief. Not with worry. But with a kind of cold, surgical clarity. Someone close to Heyman's circle later leaked the quote. "Seth's done pretending he's a god. This is the reality check we needed." That quote sent shockwaves through the locker room. Some called it heartless. Others, prophetic. But what came next made it clear that Heyman wasn't mourning a loss, he was orchestrating a shift, because within 24 hours, Heyman had already begun restructuring the faction. He held a closed-door meeting with Breaker and Reed. Witnesses say Heyman walked in carrying a folder labeled simply, WrestleMania 42. The folder reportedly contained revised main event plans. Ones that no longer included Rollins. Insiders say Heyman told Breaker, "This is your moment now. Prove why I backed you before the world knew your name." What was supposed to be a faction built around a veteran ring general suddenly became a proving ground for two monsters, unleashed without a leash. And yet, inside the hospital room where Seth Rollins lay sedated, there was no chaos. Only silence. A nurse described the scene. He lay still, an ice pack on his knee, face pale from the morphine drip. No screams. No bravado. Just one sentence repeated in a whisper, like a man watching his life unravel in real time. "I knew this would happen." The nurse didn't know who to call. Becky Lynch hadn't arrived yet. WWE medical staff had cleared the hallways. And the only person on the official visitor list? Paul Heyman. But Heyman never came. There was a time, brief, fleeting, when Seth Rollins trusted Paul Heyman. When he believed the mastermind behind Roman Reigns could resurrect him from the chaos of 2024. Heyman had sold him the dream, a new dynasty, a faction that didn't just destroy enemies, but shaped the future of WWE, and for a moment, it worked. Braun Breaker's dominance. Bronson Reed's rebirth. Seth's swagger returning in fiery promos and crimson suits. But underneath, the pressure mounted. Rollins' knee, never fully healed, began to give out during house shows. By May, trainers were urging him to cut back. By June, he was injecting cortisone to survive, and by July, he was lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a man who never intended to come. Paul Heyman was already building his next move. In a confidential meeting with TripleH, Heyman reportedly presented a new vision, one in which Braun Breaker headlines WrestleMania 42 as the next chosen one. The shift was brutal. Clinical, WWE is a battlefield, Heyman was quoted saying. And Seth Rollins has fallen. Sources close to the production team say that a promo package was already in early edit by Monday morning, featuring Breaker and Reed as the monsters unleashed, with zero mention of Seth Rollins. But not everyone was ready to move on. Becky Lynch arrived at the clinic the next morning, red-eyed and silent. Security cleared the hallway as she walked in. Nurses say she didn't cry. She just sat beside Seth, took his hand, and whispered, "You carried them. Now let us carry you." It was the first human moment in a saga already drowning in politics and betrayal. Later that day, Becky reportedly confronted Heyman by phone. The conversation was short. One sentence from her leaked, "You used him up and left him to bleed." Heyman's alleged reply, "I didn't use him. I gave him a stage." But inside the locker room, resentment is growing. Bronson Reed has reportedly distanced himself from Heyman, with sources claiming he's uncomfortable with how fast Seth was erased from the narrative. Braun Breaker, however, has leaned into it. He's cut 2 unscheduled promos and live events since the injury, both ending with the words, "This is the new order. No kings. Just killers." And that might be what Heyman wanted all along, because for all his theatrics, Paul Heyman doesn't cry when plans fall apart. He rewrites them, and in the silence left by Seth Rollins, he's building something dangerous. But one quote remains. A nurse at the clinic who overheard Seth after a sedative wore off reported him saying this, "I told them I could still carry it. I thought I could take the pain." It wasn't said to anyone. It wasn't a statement. It was a confession, because deep down, Seth Rollins knew this moment would come. He'd fought through surgeries. He'd defied doctors. He'd been the workhorse for years while others fell to politics and burnout, but this time, there was no architect's plan, just pain, and a spotlight that now shines on someone else. Inside WWE headquarters, no one dares say it out loud, but behind closed doors, the speculation has already begun. Has Seth Rollins wrestled his last match? It's the unspoken question echoing through every production meeting, medical call, and faction strategy session. Because while WWE's official statement uses words like evaluating and temporary hiatus, insiders say the diagnosis is more severe than initially reported. According to medical sources close to the situation, Seth Rollins has suffered a partial ligament rupture and cartilage degradation in the same knee he tore nearly a decade ago. But this time, his body isn't healing the same. His recovery won't be measured in weeks, it will be measured in years, if it happens at all. In the days following the injury, the silence from WWE's top brass has been deafening. TripleH has refused to comment. Creative meetings have been abruptly cancelled. Camera crews, previously booked for a Seth Rollins faction segment, were reassigned to Braun Breaker's solo promo shoot. But inside the Performance Center, things are boiling over. Bronson Reed is no longer taking Paul Heyman's calls. At first, Reed seemed aligned with Heyman's strategy. But after hearing how Rollins was erased from upcoming promotional packages, and after witnessing Breaker's promo that ended with "No kings. Just killers," he reportedly walked out of a creative meeting without a word. According to one staffer, Reed told a friend later that night, "We weren't supposed to be mercenaries. This was a family. At least, that's what Seth made us believe." Meanwhile, Becky Lynch is waging her own quiet war. She hasn't gone public. Not yet. But those close to her say she's furious, not just at the injury, but at the coldness with which WWE moved on. She's told friends that if WWE treats a 5-time world champion like disposable material, then what hope does anyone else have? One friend, a former backstage producer, described her anger as volcanic. She's not just fighting for Seth. She's fighting for the respect he earned, and the family they've built around that ring. She's reportedly scheduled a private meeting with TripleH this week, not as a performer, but as a partner of the man who carried Raw on his back for over a year. In the shadows, however, Paul Heyman remains undeterred publicly. He hasn't said much beyond this cryptic statement on WWE social media. Every empire must evolve. Seth Rollins was never the endpoint, he was the spark. Now the wildfire begins. It's classic Heyman, cold, calculated, forward-looking, but internally, some are starting to question his grip because without Rollins, Heyman's empire is no longer built on experience, it's built on volatility. Braun Breaker is a beast. No one denies that, but even beasts need a conscience. And Rollins was the last shred of it. There's also growing concern among WWE medical personnel about how long Rollins had been concealing his condition. According to leaked medical records reviewed by a source, Rollins had been receiving weekly fluid drainage, anti-inflammatory injections, and had signed multiple waivers excusing WWE of liability. He was living on borrowed time, one medic said. Every bump, every landing, it could have snapped at any second. And he knew. Another source revealed that Rollins turned down a medical leave in June, insisting he couldn't leave the faction vulnerable. With bloodline tensions rising, that choice may have cost him his career, and yet, some believe this isn't the end. Backstage at Raw, Cody Rhodes was overheard telling talent, Seth's story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Guys like him don't go out on a stretcher. They rise. Even from ashes. Others aren't so sure. A Hall of Fame talent reportedly warned, "We said the same thing about Edge in 2011. About Daniel Bryan in 2016. Reality doesn't care how much you love this business. When your body's done, it's done." But no quote has hit harder than Rollins' own, whispered through pain, caught by a nurse, and later leaked to an anonymous wrestling blog. "If this is how I go out, tell them I didn't regret it. Not 1 second. It was raw, human, and heart-wrenching, because for a man who was always theatrical in the ring, this was the one moment he wasn't performing. He was saying goodbye. And Paul Heyman? He's already booking forward. Internal reports show Heyman has proposed an all-new bloodline faction, this time centered around Braun Breaker, Solo Sikoa, and an unnamed next-generation enforcer expected to debut after SummerSlam. The name whispered through the halls, Zilla Fatu. If true, the move would not only signal the rise of a post-Rollins WWE, but also a reformation of the bloodline under Heyman's vision, one without the emotional weight of Roman Reigns, and without the rebellious fire of Seth Rollins. One source who's worked with Heyman for over a decade said, "This is what Paul does. He doesn't mourn. He builds." But others wonder how long a machine like that can run without soul. In Seth Rollins' hospital room, the painkillers are starting to fade. Becky sits beside him, scrolling through headlines on her phone, each one colder than the last. Heyman shifts to Breaker-era Rollins' future uncertain amid injury fallout. The Messiah falls silent. She shows none of them to Seth, but she knows he'll see them eventually. She knows he'll hear the crowd again, feel the call of the ring again, and she knows, deep down, that if this is his curtain call, it won't be on someone else's terms, because if Seth Rollins does return, it won't be as the visionary, it won't be as the architect, it won't be as Paul Heyman's anchored, it will be as a man who watched the world move on without him, and came back to burn it all down. And when that moment comes, you'll know it wasn't revenge, it was redemption. As Seth Rollins lay healing behind closed doors, the war outside his hospital room only escalated, and it wasn't being waged in a ring, but in conference rooms, locker rooms, and underground training facilities from Orlando to Stamford, because Paul Heyman wasn't done. While the wrestling world obsessed over Rollins' future, Heyman was already plotting a new dynasty, one that wouldn't rely on fragile knees or veteran loyalty. He had a new name on his mind. One that hadn't graced a WWE screen yet but had been haunting their radar for over a year. Zilla Fatu, the son of the late Umaga. A bloodline by birth. And now, potentially, the nuclear warhead behind Heyman's next chapter. It started with a whisper. A quiet flight from Houston to Orlando. A private car waiting. No social media activity. No fan photos. But someone spotted him. A performance center intern, who later told a friend, "I swear that was Zilla. He wasn't here to train. He was here to meet someone." That someone, sources confirm, was Paul Heyman. The meeting was unannounced. No official contract signed. But insiders say Heyman was already referring to him as the final piece. The plan? Rebuild the bloodline, not around family loyalty, but around controlled chaos. A faction without emotion. Without weakness. Without anyone like Seth Rollins, and yet, for all of Heyman's maneuvering, there was one variable he hadn't accounted for: Becky Lynch. She wasn't playing backstage politics. She wasn't posting cryptic tweets, she was knocking on doors. Demanding meetings. Challenging decisions, and one by one, the walls started to shake. At a closed-door meeting with WWE's executive team, Becky reportedly laid it all out, not just about Seth's injury, but about the system that allowed him to wrestle in pain for 6 months. The culture that rewarded silence over honesty. The machine that pushed stars until they broke, and then replaced them before the stretcher even cleared the curtain. Her words weren't explosive. They were quiet. Measured. But cutting. If this is how we treat the ones who built the brand, what are we doing? Sources say the room went silent. No one had an answer, because deep down, they all knew, Seth Rollins was the glue. The man who worked every brand, every show, every feud. Who absorbed every change in the bloodline storyline when Roman disappeared. Who never asked for credit, only opportunity. Now he was gone. And the silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Heyman was accelerating his agenda. At the next SmackDown taping, Braun Breaker was handed the main event segment, a spotlight previously reserved for Roman Reigns or Rollins. But the twist? The promo ended with a shadow behind him. A man standing at the top of the ramp. No name. No music. Just a figure in a hoodie, hands behind his back, presence undeniable. The internet exploded. Zilla Fatu is coming. It trended in under 5 minutes. And behind the scenes, Heyman smiled, because the faction was forming. Bronson Reed. Breaker. Fatu. No emotion. No regret, just war. But something shifted that night. Cody Rhodes, who had long remained silent in the chaos, took a stand. In a backstage segment aired exclusively on digital platforms, Cody addressed the situation without naming names. There's a storm coming to this company. One that thinks pain equals power. But pain doesn't make you strong. Surviving it does. And if anyone knows how to survive, it's Seth Rollins. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a warning, because for weeks, Cody had watched Heyman's rise in the shadows. And now, with Seth out, there was a vacuum of leadership. 1 Cody had no intention of letting Heyman fill. Behind the curtain, Rollins' absence was beginning to create cracks. WWE creative found themselves lost without their anchor. Live shows lacked cohesion. Promos felt disjointed. Even fans began to notice, attendance dipped slightly, and social media buzz shifted from what's next, to where's Seth? The silence was taking its toll, and then, Rollins spoke. It wasn't a formal promo. Not a tweet. Not a WWE segment. It was a leaked voice memo. Sent privately to a close friend, but somehow leaked to the internet within hours. His voice was hoarse. Steady. But tired. I don't know if I'll be back. Not the way people expect. But I do know this. I gave everything. Every show. Every bump. Every goddamn minute. And when it cracked, they all ran. Except her. Except my people. If I come back, it's not for legacy. It's to remind them who built the house they're trying to burn down. The audio was raw. Unedited. Real fans flooded the comments with the hashtag #BurnItDown one last time, and just like that, the shift began. Bronson Reed requested time off. According to sources, he was emotionally exhausted and tired of being a pawn. He reportedly told WWE officials he wasn't interested in continuing under the current direction. Zilla Fatu's debut was delayed. No explanation. No promo, just pulled quietly. And Becky Lynch? She was given the green light for a rare unsanctioned live mic segment the following Monday on Raw. It was short, but unforgettable. Dressed in black, she walked to the ring alone. No music. No fanfare. She stood beneath a single spotlight and said, "You can build new monsters. You can write new kings. But don't forget who taught them how to fight." Seth Rollins didn't just survive this industry. He carried it. And when he's ready, we'll remind you why. She dropped the mic. No music played, just a crowd chanting, "Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Seth." And somewhere, in a private recovery room, a man with a brace on his leg and fire in his heart, smiled for the first time in weeks. A moment between the noise, between the storylines, between the carefully crafted segments of a company that prides itself on always moving forward. That moment, quiet, still, almost reverent, happened backstage at the WWE Performance Center. A long hallway, lights buzzing faintly above, with posters of legends staring down from the walls. In the middle of it, Braun Breaker stood alone. Phone in hand. No music. No chaos. Just a notification he couldn't stop reading: "Zilla's debut has been postponed." It wasn't a question. It was a fact. A decision made not by Paul Heyman, but by someone even higher, perhaps someone in the boardroom who had seen the analytics, watched the trend lines, listened to the growing chorus of voices chanting for Seth Rollins. Zilla Fatu's arrival, once teased as the ignition of a new era, was now seen as premature. The crowd wasn't asking for new blood anymore. They were asking for closure. For resolution. For the one man who hadn't been given the respect he deserved before being pushed aside. Braun's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. For all his power, all his dominance, all his heat, he was still in someone else's shadow. Seth's shadow. The man lying in a hospital bed was still dictating the temperature of the entire company. And Braun hated it. Back in Stamford, the debate had reached fever pitch. WWE executives were torn. The data said it all: audience sentiment was shifting. The online buzz surrounding Paul Heyman's faction, once electric, had begun to dim under scrutiny. Fan forums were filled with threads asking, why was Seth treated this way? And is WWE turning its back on loyalty? Even mainstream outlets picked up the story. ESPN ran a piece titled, "Seth Rollins, the workhorse WWE left behind?" Bleacher Report called it the most unceremonious exit of a legend in the modern era. And through all of it, Rollins remained silent. That silence began to haunt people. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, it was the absence of his presence. There were no vlogs. No tweets. No cryptic video packages. Not even leaked photos from inside the hospital. Becky Lynch had gone quiet too, her appearances limited, her interviews deferred. What was originally thought to be a temporary injury began to feel like a curtain slowly closing. And that's when Paul Heyman started to lose control. The first crack came when Bronson Reed refused to appear at a SmackDown taping. No explanation. No communication. Just a text to his agent that read, "Not tonight. I'm not doing this without Seth." Word spread quickly. Inside the locker room, whispers turned to warnings. Younger talent, once eager to get under Heyman's wing, started asking questions. What happens if we get hurt? Will we be erased too? Paul, for his part, never changed his demeanor. He walked the halls with that same quiet intensity, arms folded behind his back, lips pursed in thought. But those who know Heyman know that silence isn't calm, it's calculation. And in those days following Becky's explosive promo, Paul wasn't licking wounds. He was planning a counterstrike. He made the call on a Tuesday afternoon. Zilla Fatu was still under WWE radar, no official promos, no in-ring debut. But Heyman had one thing left, influence. He invited Zilla to a private dinner. No handlers. No agents. Just the two of them in a quiet booth at a secluded steakhouse outside Orlando. The conversation, according to one server, was intense. short bursts of emotion followed by long stretches of silence. But one thing was overheard clearly. Heyman leaning in and saying, "This isn't about filling a spot. It's about finishing what Roman started." That sentence hit differently, because even though Roman Reigns hadn't been seen in months, his name, his shadow, his legacy still lingered. And now, through Heyman's words, that legacy was being repurposed. Not as a bloodline, but as a blood debt. A war machine engineered not by tradition, but by trauma. Rollins was out. Reed was disillusioned. Cody Rhodes was stirring rebellion backstage. And Heyman needed something to lock the audience back in before the momentum collapsed completely. But the audience wasn't buying it.in arenas across the country. Something unplanned started happening. Before shows. During breaks. Even during matches. A chant would rise, seemingly from nowhere, yet everywhere at once. 3 words, "Where is Seth?" It started as a whisper. Then it grew. WWE producers began instructing the audio crew to lower crowd mics when the chants broke out. Camera cuts became quicker. Shot transitions became more erratic. Anything to keep the sound from overwhelming the broadcast. But the fans kept chanting. In Denver. In Brooklyn. In Toronto. And then, in Chicago, Rollins' spiritual home, the roof nearly came off during a Braun Breaker segment. He stood mid-ring, delivering a cold-blooded promo about dominance, about legacy, about stepping over the fallen. And then it hit, "We want Seth, we want Seth." Breaker paused. Just for a second. His nostrils flared. The promo script was still in his head, but something inside him shifted. He turned to the camera, stared straight into the lens, and delivered a line that wasn't written by creative. "He's not coming back. And if he does, I'll break him again." The boos were deafening. And somewhere backstage, Heyman smiled. That was the chaos he needed. But even Paul knew, it wasn't going to be enough. Not anymore, because the man they thought they buried with a stretcher was starting to rise. Not in front of cameras. Not in arenas. But in the gym. A video leaked 3 days later. No logos. No music. Just grainy footage from a private training center in Davenport, Iowa. The camera, likely a phone, focused on a squat rack. A man with a brace on his left leg. Sleeves rolled up. Sweat pouring. Lifting. Breathing. Pushing. And then, turning toward the camera, his face visible just long enough for the world to freeze. "It was Seth Rollins." No caption. No soundbite. Just one look. One nod. And then a return to the weights. The internet exploded. Twitter turned the clip viral in under 15 minutes. Instagram fan pages began posting tributes. Reddit forums that had mourned Rollins' retirement were now buzzing with rumors. Was that footage recent? Is he cleared? Is he training for a return? No answers came, but they didn't need to, because the message was already clear. Seth wasn't done, and WWE wasn't ready for what was coming. Back at the Performance Center, Bronson Reed returned quietly. No grand entrance. No promo. Just a quiet handshake with a few producers and a long talk with Shawn Michaels. Those who overheard say Reed was clear. He wanted to finish the story on his terms, not Heyman's. And if that meant standing against Breaker, against Zilla, against whatever machine they were building, then so be it. Meanwhile, Becky Lynch had gone dark. No appearances. No interviews. But she was working, behind the scenes.